clock ticks over to 3. Hello and welcome. This is the Washington Center for Equitable Growth's informational webinar about our grant opportunities and the 2023 request for proposals. I'm Corinne Davis. I'm the Director of Academic Programs, and I'm joined today by my colleagues, Jonathan Fisher, our Research Advisor, and Colleen Harwood, Grant Operations Manager. So today we're going to run through a few things. I'm going to start by giving just a little bit of information on equitable growth and our mission. Jonathan is then going to talk through our funding priorities and the types of research that we support. And finally, Colleen will talk about the application process and tips for a successful application. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. First, you can drop questions in the Q&A box. Please do include your name and affiliation if you would. Any technical or logistical questions about the webinar itself can be dropped into the chat. And if you have specific questions about your specific research project or a specific situation, the best thing to do is to send those to grants@equitablegrowth.org. Or alternatively, if you'd like, you can fill out a form, which we'll drop in the chat now, to request office hours, which are an opportunity to talk with Equitable Growth staff about your specific questions. So as you can see, this event is being recorded. Any video will be available on our YouTube channel following. So if you need to leave early or if you didn't catch something, you can review the recording and feel free to share it with others who may have questions. All right, Colleen, if you would share slides. Okay, you can skip to the next one. So the Washington Center for Equitable Growth is a nonprofit research and grant-making organization dedicated to advancing evidence-backed ideas and policies that promote strong, stable, and broad-based economic growth. Next slide. So because our mission is not just to support cutting-edge academic research that's going to make an academic contribution, we're also interested in the policy relevance. We do have a unique funding approach. We work to identify open questions in the policy landscape and then to fund research that could answer those questions. And then we work to disseminate those findings to policymakers and to an audience outside of academia. Next slide. So to achieve our mission, thank you. To achieve our mission, we both support and build a growing academic community, including early career scholars, which is going to be the focus today, doctoral and dissertation scholar grants, specifically studying the relationship between inequality and growth. But we also work hard to build a bridge between academics and policymakers. And we do have a lot of programming around that, which I encourage you to take a look at on our website. But the focus today is going to be on the grant program. Okay, next slide. So today we're going to talk about both the doctoral, postdoctoral funding opportunity, as well as the dissertation scholars program. Both of these are open to current graduate students enrolled in a PhD program at a US university. Colleen is going to get a little bit more into the details about the application process and the differences, but in essence, the doctoral program is, those grants are set at $15,000 over 1 year and support a discrete research project, where the dissertation scholars program is a year-long virtual in-residence opportunity that does come with some responsibilities and is intended to support the scholar on a much broader range of things, including mentorship and career development. We have academic grants as well. I should note that PhD students are eligible to apply for an academic grant. Those grants can be larger. They're anywhere in the range of $25,000 to $100,000, $25,000 to $100,000, I should note. You can apply to those, but it's really just dependent on the pool that you'd like to compete in. So if you have larger funding needs, you are eligible to apply, but you will be competing with oftentimes quite established faculty. Okay, next slide, I think. Oh, yep, last slide for me, and then I'll hand it over to Jonathan. And that is just that we only have one grant cycle per year, and the acceptance rate is generally about 10%. Which is average for private foundations, so don't be alarmed. And the application process is designed to make the threshold low. It's a 6-page proposal. And I'll now hand it over to Jonathan to talk more about our funding priorities.
Thanks, Corinne. So as Corinne mentioned, I'm Jonathan Fisher. I'm the research advisor here at Equitable Growth, and I've been here a little over a year. So this is my second time going through the grant cycle. And I have a couple of roles here at Equitable Growth, and one is to help grow our network of scholars and to help make connections between scholars and across our network, and also have a large role in grant review. And part of that is helping develop our funding priorities and the questions that show up in our request for proposals. And so we have these 4 broad areas where we ask that you put your proposal into. That we ask you to either put it into one of these 4 areas. Now, we often know that research overlaps across these areas, but we ask you to put it in one. And but you can also speak to these other areas as well. So we've got the 4 funding areas, and there are detailed questions in the RFP of the types of things we're interested in, but that's not an exhaustive list, it's just the types of questions. So if you want to see the types of questions we envision in each funding area, you can go to the full RFP. And speaking of the full RFP, if we go to the next slide, Colleen, then we support research. I'm going to talk about the second point in more detail. You can read the first one. Is we support research using many different types of evidence, various methodological approaches, and cutting across disciplines. So there's not one approach to a successful proposal. We fund qualitative and quantitative research and mixed methods. We also use very different types of evidence as well. It doesn't have to all be quasi-experimental variation, or some of it can just be more descriptive evidence. So it is the sort of research we're interested in doesn't fit into one easy category. And again, across academic disciplines. Then the next slide, please. And then I'll say that we do give preference to projects that can speak to the one or more of these areas. These areas aren't going to guarantee you get funding if you can speak to all 4 of them, or if you don't speak to them, that's not going to guarantee you don't get funding, but it does give you a little boost when we're going through our review. And I want to highlight 2 of these in more detail. First is that the research that touches on the role of racial stratification receives preference. And that can be either your research directly speaks to the role of racial stratification, or it may be indirect. You may be studying wealth inequality and you don't have data on race, but you can speak to, the thing you're studying is either increasing wealth inequality or decreasing it. And then you can say, well, indirectly, we know there are differences in wealth inequality by race. And so what I find, or what we find, will have an impact on racial stratification, even if we can't speak directly to it. And so in your proposal, if you can't speak directly to racial stratification, but you think you can indirectly, it would still be useful to mention that in the proposal. The other thing that I'll mention is this last point, which is that we give preference to research that engages across disciplines. So if you're an economist or a sociologist studying mobility and all you do is cite literature in your own discipline and not across disciplines, it will reflect poorly on it, because these disciplines should be speaking to each other, and our reviewers, our internal reviewers and our external reviewers, are also going to be across disciplines, and so they will know this additional literature, and so it's something that you should take into account. It's good practice just in general, but also for it's important if you are citing the relevant literature across disciplines. So now I'm going to turn it over to Colleen.
Thank you, Jonathan. Hello, I'm Colleen Harwood. I'm the Grant Operations Manager here at Equitable Growth, and I'll be sharing details of the application process and tips for a successful application. So the 2023 online application portal, which is powered by Submittable, is now open, and the deadline to submit a doctoral proposal is Monday, March 20th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. The link to the online portal can be found within the RFP, and we'll also share the direct link through the webinar chat function now. For more details, an FAQ page, including eligibility criteria and a suggested template for writing your proposal, please see our doctoral grants, as well as our dissertation scholar web pages, which we will also share in the chat now. For our doctoral grants, all proposals will be evaluated on how well the proposed research questions are appropriately framed within the existing literature, the potential to advance the literature, and methodological soundness. Relevance to Equitable Growth's mission and the potential to make a contribution to evidence-backed policy solutions will also be taken into consideration. In addition to our doctoral grant program, we offer, as Corinne mentioned, a virtual in-residence scholars program. Equitable Growth is committed to building a pipeline of scholars doing cutting-edge research on inequality and growth, and to supporting them to engage in the public sphere. The program provides PhD candidates with financial and professional support to pursue their own research and to gain familiarity with current policy discussions and the policy process. The position is open to pre-dissertation scholars who are currently enrolled in a PhD program at a US university and whose research aligns with Equitable Growth's funding priorities. Applications for the Dissertation Scholars Program are also due Monday, January 23rd at 11:59 p.m., which is the same deadline as our academic grant LOI deadline. Finalists will be invited to a virtual site visit to give a presentation and meet with staff from our policy, communications, external, and government affairs and academic programs teams, meeting with a lot of people. And dissertation scholar applicants who are not selected for the program will be invited to also apply for a doctoral grant. They're on different timelines, so it is possible to still be considered for a doctoral grant if you are no longer in consideration for a dissertation scholar fellowship. In addition to the 6-page proposal that you'll submit for your dissertation scholar application, scholar applicants will also submit a statement of purpose, which will be evaluated on the clarity of motivation of overall research agenda and how proposed research fits within the overall research agenda and the relationship of your research to Equitable Growth's mission and current policy debates. Your statement of purpose should include specific and concrete goals on how spending time with Equitable Growth would further your career and your research. As you prepare to submit your application, please take time to read through each section of the request for proposals, as well as the web pages shared earlier. Following these guidelines will help you understand if your research is a good fit for Equitable Growth and will help you draft a strong proposal for the review committee to consider. You must be concise while also providing sufficient information for reviewers to evaluate the rigor and appropriateness of the research design. It is important that your project be at the right stage for funding and that you share that information with the reviewers. You have to find the sweet spot. You need to have enough done to be convincing about your project, but still have new work to accomplish with the funding you are applying for. When writing any funding request proposal, it is important to structure your writing in a way where the reviewer can quickly understand your goals and your plan to accomplish your goals. We will share in the Zoom chat a link to a suggested template that we've put together that you can download and use for your proposal. This works for your doctoral proposal as well as your dissertation scholar proposal. Using the evaluation criteria as headers to organize your proposal will help you stick to the page limit while ensuring you provide the information reviewers need to assess your proposal. As you prepare to submit your application, take the time to read through each section of the RFP, as I mentioned earlier. And we also highly recommend creating your online application portal account sooner rather than later so that you can check out the requirements and make sure you don't have any questions prior to the deadline. If you are working with other researchers for your doctoral grant in particular, you would want to designate your co-PIs on the project, you'll need to have a CV from them to be ready to upload. The main applicant is responsible for submitting all materials for the project. And you can save your application as a draft and return to it at any time. So it doesn't hurt to get started on your application online ahead of time. A common mistake in unsuccessful proposals is a lack of consistency when talking about your research question or research design. Be sure to proofread prior to submitting. The last tip I have for you before we turn to the Q&A is to be clear about your data sources and status of data access. It is not a requirement to have access to your data that your project needs at the time of submission, but it will help us understand and assess your proposal if you state what types of data you will use and how you plan to access that data. That concludes the presentation portion of the webinar, and now we will move on to the Q&A. Thank you for those of you who have already submitted questions to the Q&A box. And if we do not get to your specific question today, please feel free to email us at grants@equitablegrowth.org. Or as Corinne mentioned earlier, you can use the form to schedule an office hours call with us if you need to discuss further your project or any questions you have about applying. So let me now move to the Q&A box. And our first question is, I'm a postdoc at a US school, but I'm on the job market. Am I eligible for a postdoc grant? Corinne, can you take this one?
Yes, you are. If you're currently a postdoc, you are eligible to apply. There may be some details to sort out depending on where you land a job. But I would say at this point in time, you are currently eligible and therefore you can apply.
Great. And then the next question is, are you allowed to apply for a doctoral grant and an academic grant at the same time? The answer is yes. They would be a slightly different application because your doctoral grant proposal will be a 6-page proposal and your academic grant is a 2-prong application approach. So you would need to distill your research to a 2 to 3-page letter of inquiry to apply for the academic grant, but there's nothing stopping you from applying for all of our programs at the same time. And you can also submit more than one project to, if you have multiple projects that you feel strongly about and you have the time and energy to put together applications for multiple, you can submit multiple projects to all of our different grant programs. The next question is, what is the acceptance rate of dissertation scholars? Don't know if I have, do you have a number?
I prepared, I
Okay.
saw this question, so while you were talking, I looked into it. It's about 5 to 10%, so about the same as our funding. We support fewer dissertation scholars, but we typically also receive fewer applications. It's because it's quite different from a grant. You're committing to spending a year with us.
The next question is, my dissertation may have an international comparative component. Is this allowable for our grant program? Corinne, I think you answered a similar question in our webinar earlier today.
Sure. So our focus is on the United States. And so generally speaking, we are open to funding research that uses non-US data, particularly when similar data is not available in the United States, or to answer a question that is relevant to the US policy context. So just as one example for a question that may be relevant is a wealth tax. We've funded research on wealth tax in Scandinavian countries. You can't study that in the United States because we don't have a wealth tax. But I guess I would just say that you would really need to be convincing that your research is relevant in a US context. It needs to be applicable to the United States.
Great. The next question is, when a student is a dissertation scholar, are they still considered a full-time enrolled student at their home institution? And I believe the answer to that is yes, but we would encourage you to discuss with your university offices that you are applying for this type of program, so that you that any details they need that you can find out ahead of time.
And we have supported non-US, we've supported international students as dissertation scholars in the past.
Next question is, should the budget narrative for dissertation scholars discuss the use of $50,000 across research and stipend support? The answer to that is no. We don't ask for a budget narrative for the dissertation scholar application. We ask for a little bit of detail for the doctoral grants to know what you would spend the $15,000 on. It's often just stipend support, which is more than appropriate. And the $50,000 is generally stipend support. It's supporting the scholar throughout the whole year, but it can be used in some cases if you need a specific amount of money to buy data. You should tell us that in your application, but it's not a necessary component because generally it's considered stipend support for the dissertation scholar. For the doctoral grant, how similar should the 6-page proposal look to a dissertation defense proposal? I worry that the level of detail in the latter is far too much for the former. Jonathan, could you take a stab at this?
You might borrow some language from your defense proposal, but I would look at the template that Sanjay has put in the chat and use that. So I think you're aiming for a different audience in this grant proposal than you are for your dissertation defense. So there may be some language you can borrow, but I think there are going to be significant differences between the two.
Thank you. Someone is asking about the timeline after the doctoral deadline of March 20th. And to answer that, the funding will be announced by usually early to mid-July at the latest is when you would find out if you were successful for your doctoral grant application. And relatedly, someone is asking about if it's a 1 or 2-step application process for doctoral grants, and it's just a 1-step. You will submit your application online, and then a few months later, you'll find out if that project was successful. And so the 10% acceptance rate is just across the board from the pool of applicants we get for doctoral. What are some of the professional development opportunities that dissertation scholars receive? Corinne, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So dissertation scholars are required to support the grant review process. And so that is obviously a learning opportunity. You'll be reading applications, providing reviews, and engaging in both the review comments that external and internal reviewers provide, as well as meetings to discuss funding decisions. So that is a professional development opportunity in the sense that you're getting exposure to how the grant seeking process works, how to put together a compelling proposal, and kind of an inside look at what it means to engage in grant review and make funding decisions. In addition to that, I'm going to let Jonathan talk a little bit about the research support that he provides. But before I hand it over to him, I will just note that we work hard to expose dissertation scholars and identify opportunities about how to make research relevant to policy. So it's sometimes like attending meetings or engaging in other opportunities, and then in addition to that, we try to support you to build a network and to identify mentors within our network. And so we'll support you with conference engagement, connecting with external advisors, and just anything really that we can do to support your growth and your potential to have a successful academic career. Jonathan, do you want to just touch on research mentorship?
Yes. So the dissertation scholars meet with me, and I can give additional feedback on the things you're working on. And one of our dissertation scholars this year is on the job market, so I'm giving advice from my experience on the job market. Obviously, you can get that. You'll get different levels of support from your department on the job market, and so I can fill in some holes. I've also have experience, working in non-academic settings and in academic settings, so I can also give advice there. But I think a lot of what we can also do is, as Corinne mentioned, is the networking, is connect you with additional people who can help you. So there's a lot that we do for the dissertation scholars, and it's going to depend on what your needs are or what your interests are as well. It's not cookie cutter. We're going to tailor it to where you need support.
Great. And we have a question about the academic grants, and I will just encourage you to, if you're interested in applying for an academic grant, you should check out our recorded webinar from earlier today. It should be on the Equitable Growth YouTube page as a recording already, and if not, it will be there very soon, and it will also be on our website soon. Okay, moving on to next question. Can you submit an application for a project you are co-authoring with a faculty member? I would say yes, that's fairly common that universities have often have a requirement to have a co-PI that is a faculty member, but the funding would have to be just for you as the student or the doctoral or postdoctoral individual. That funding cannot go towards the faculty member. And then there's a question about what the letters of support or letters of reference should talk about, which actually brings me to a good point that I should have mentioned earlier, that because you're asking for a letter of support or 2 letters of support during your dissertation scholar application, it's very important that you ask for those ahead of time. So you and your letter writer are not scrambling to submit the night of the application, because that is due on the same day as the rest of the application, Monday, January 23rd. So if you're planning on that, make sure you speak to your potential letter writers ahead of time and look at the application and see what you need to do to get that letter uploaded. Corinne, could you speak to what those letters should touch on?
Sure. Letters of recommendation, the preferences for those to come from the chair of your committee and other advisors, if possible. And they should touch on both your research and your research agenda and your skills as a researcher, but then also try to help us understand why time at Equitable Growth would be beneficial for you. So anything that you can speak to about, anything that they can speak to about other activities that you participated in, or just how to, why getting exposure to the policymaking process and creating policy relevant research, I think would be very helpful.
The next question is, what sort of average weekly time commitment should one expect as a dissertation scholar, and what do these activities generally look like? And Corinne touched on this a little bit earlier about scholars participating in grant review. Corinne, could you speak to an average number of hours? I think it varies throughout the year.
It varies. Yeah, I would say that the vast majority of time is spent on your own research. There is a significant amount of time put towards grant review, but it comes in it comes in small chunks. So it may be like an intense period of time, but it's just only going to be over the course of about 2 weeks. And those are spread out from January through June. And in terms of other opportunities and ways to engage, those are sort of they're generally spread out over the course of your term. So you would expect to spend most of your time on your own research. And I would also say that the level of engagement varies by person. As Jonathan says, it's not cookie cutter. So if you have more time to engage, we can give you opportunities to engage. And if you really just need to buckle down and finish your job market paper, we can support you in that. And that would be fine. Can I take the statement of purpose question, Colleen? Because this is really important. A successful statement of purpose should give us some context about what motivates your research question and your research agenda. It should situate the proposal, which generally just focuses on one research project, within your overall research agenda. It should not just be a description of your research, however. You must tell us why a year with Equitable Growth would help advance your research and your career. So I really encourage you to engage with our website, try to learn a little bit more about the organization and the policy areas that we focus on, and make a connection to how time with us and engaging with us and our policy experts would advance your career and your personal goals.
So we have about 1 minute left. Corinne, is there another particular question you'd like to close on?
I think I can just run through a couple really quick. In terms of the budget, the budget can be quite straightforward. As Colleen mentioned, for dissertation scholars, it's mainly stipend support. It's frequently the same for doctoral grants. So if you receive the $15,000 doctoral or postdoctoral grant, and that is just going to go to stipend support, that's fine. So you can simply state that you will use it for that. If you have specific needs, you should spell those out. So if you have to purchase data or you want survey incentives, but the budget narrative can be quite short. We have a couple questions about in-person engagement or options for dissertation scholars. We are open to a 100% in virtual, but we would likely be able to provide some in-person opportunities as well.
Okay, it is 3:30. Thank you so much for all of these great questions. And like I said earlier, if we didn't get to you, please email us at grants@equitablegrowth.org and use the office hours forum to request an appointment to meet with us to talk about your research or any other questions you may have. That is all we have for you. Thank you so much.